There is one quality in particular that I think most engineers covet, and that quality is space. Now, space is an interesting one because, in my humble opinion, it is perhaps the one emotive, vibe, textural quality of a production that you cannot get with the additive mindset. Welcome to Kush After Hours. My name's Gregory Scott. It's good to be back again. As of this moment in this episode, if you're watching this channel and you're watching this episode right now, this channel is for you. I'm done with giving so much thought, energy to trying to figure out what's going to hit, what's going to be the most popular, what's going to have the most reach, what's going to do the most engagement. I was doing that a year and a half ago when this channel was really starting to cook, and it was working. We were the subscribers up, view count up, view time up, ad revenue for Alphabet, Google up. I burned out on it, and that's why it's been so hard for me to get back into it. And I tell you this now because I feel back into it, and I have relieved myself, and therefore you, of the burden of me trying to think of things that are somehow going to be popular. And instead, you're just going to get my weirdest, most random thoughts. Not that I was shy about sharing those anyway, but I'm not even going to try to couch them in valuable content. I'm just going to share my thoughts and my ideas with you as I learn about this crazy freaking game of music production. So that's my spiel on that. Thank you for listening, and thank you for the support. So today's random weird thought is, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, at a certain point, basically when everything is in a mix, but really when you have two sounds in a mix, you can't really turn anything up. It's a strange thought. I was like, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know about you. I have these thoughts, and I'm like, sometimes I get taken aback by my own thoughts. I'm like, wait, what? Who thought that? What does that mean? And then I have a conversation with it, or I have a conversation with the person that had that thought, because I don't know about you. There's a lot of people in here vying for control of the machine at any given moment. Anyway, sometimes those people are kind enough to elaborate on their thoughts. In fact, they generally are only too happy to elaborate. And on this particular one, what they were trying to communicate to me was that, as I've said before on this channel, elsewhere in my writings, everything is relative in this game. Everything is everything. Everything affects everything. Everything is relative. And so much like planetary bodies rotating around the sun, what direction are we moving in? What direction are we facing? You could say you're looking up, but, depending on what your point of reference is, you might be looking down. You might be looking sideways. We're all moving forward. We're all moving sideways. We're all moving in circles. Those circles are moving in circles, right? So little Einsteinian here, but in the mixing game, this has relevance. I think this has relevance. Yes, of course, you can turn things up. You can grab a fader and you can jack the volume. I prefer to think of that as pushing a sound, but you're turning the gain up, you're increasing its amplitude. But what you're really doing is you're changing its relationship to anything else that's going on in the mix. Again, fairly obvious point, but this is where it gets interesting. I thought about this scenario. I wrote it down here. This is my remarkable pad. I did a little video on a couple of my favorite tools. This remarkable pad, this and the voice recorder on my iPhone. You know what? That's a whole other episode. I'll do that. So, focusing in here. Here's the scenario I ran. I'm going to use nice round numbers to make this easy. And I'll throw them up on the screen for you here. Let's just say you're mixing. And you say, this mix feels a little lean. I want a little fat. I won't feel that bass. You turn the bass up till it feels good, and you end up pushing the bass 2 dB. All right, so you've made a plus 2 dB move there on the bass. And then you listen, and your engineer brain's like, okay, well, now I got a little bit more bass. I've lost a little bit of the impact of the drums. Let me turn those up by a dB. Turn them up by a dB. Or more than likely, you just push it up till it sounds right, and then it happens to be a dB. And then you're like, you know what? I lost the vocals a little bit there. Let me just goose those a little bit, but not as much, just a half a dB. Turn that up a half a dB. And then you're like, okay, well now my guitars are a little bit lost. Maybe add some bite to them or whatever. But overall, you increase their loudness by a dB. Right? So now you've got these 4 moves have been made. And just for example purposes, these are all in the positive direction, but they could have all been, you can mix and match. This is all just math here, right? But you're a dB up on the drums, you're half a dB up on the vocals, you're 2 dB up on the bass, you're a dB up on the guitars. So you turned everything up, sort of, right? But maybe you turned almost everything down. Right? If you change your point of if your reference is just numbers, then yeah, one's up 1 dB, one's up a half dB. But if your reference is, say, the instrument that caught your ear, the bass, right? That's where this all started in this story. You're like, one more beat, one more bass, and you turned up the bass. If you keep that as a solid reference point that doesn't move, what you have in fact done is you left the bass alone and you turned everything else down by 1 to 1.5 dB. I'll let that math sink in for a second here. Maybe I'll throw some numbers up on the screen that make better sense for you. But now, both of those perspectives are true. You turned everything up, or you turned almost everything else down and left one thing the same. Why does this matter? Why am I rambling about this? I'm rambling about this because the second perspective, I think, is more valuable, more helpful, or at the very least, can be more helpful to you, probably because it's the one you don't usually have. Most engineers, I think, except for people who are really quite good at this, and there's a lot of them out there, most engineers, I think, tend to think of mixing and production as primarily an additive experience. And their engineering reflects those habits and that mindset. And it's a great mindset because it is half of the equation. There's another half to the equation, which I think for most engineers is not half of the equation. It's like a third of the equation or 10% of the equation. And that's the subtractive or the reductive part of it. So I think this is really important because, but there's a couple reasons, but get my thoughts together here. I think this is a really important distinction to make and a really important sort of mindset to cultivate, because when you think about the qualities that we want in a mix, because that really is that's the top level concern, right? What are the emotional qualities that this mix is producing, emanating, evoking? You can add things to create those qualities, or you can reveal those qualities by removing, mitigating, attenuating the aspects of the sound that are impeding them, that are getting in the way, masking them, veiling them, reducing their impact, whatever. So let's take everybody's favorite topic, brightness. Right? Used to be loudness. I still think it's brightness. I think brightness is what most engineers struggle with the most, because it's just really hard to get things to be very bright and not at all offensive. Like, you can get a mix very bassy, right? That's one of the easiest things in the world to do. How are you going to make your sound bright? Well, you can add a bunch of top end. Sure, that's the easy way. Maybe not the best way. You can take away a bunch of the low end. Probably the way to go. That's the subtractive approach. This is what I'm talking about. Because there is one quality in particular that I think most engineers covet. Most producers generally want some amount of. They often say they want more in their productions than they currently have or are getting. And that quality is space. Now, space is an interesting one because, in my humble opinion, it is perhaps the one emotive, vibe, textural quality of a production that you cannot get with the additive mindset. You cannot add space to your mix. You can only reveal space. You can only open space up. And in order to do that, you literally have to remove things that are taking up the space. So you throw up a sound, right? You start with no sound, you got nothing but space. And then you throw a sound in there, and then there's a sound. And then you throw a second sound in, and it's that second sound that really allows for a true feeling of space. I mean, yeah, you can have a reverb on a single sound, but I would argue in that case, the reverb is the second sound. You get your sound, then you got the reflections. And we need some sort of point of reference to understand what the space is. And then as soon as you start throwing more sounds in, your space shrinks more and more and more. And the only way to get it back is by taking stuff out. So if you would all covet space and want space in your mix, you have got to start thinking across the board, across the frickin' board, as subtractive, reductive, attenuating. So I'm talking everything. Like when you think about your fader moves and you're building a mix and you have something you want to have in the mix, a quality you want to amplify, whether it's brightness or urgency or space, whatever it is, try to think of what you can take away first and foremost to reveal more of that quality or to impart more of that quality. Now, sometimes that's a little tricky. If you want something to sound more dense, that's really hard to do subtractively. That generally requires an additive mindset. You have to add harmonic information. You have to compress and condense, limit, saturate, do whatever you want to pack more information into a smaller space. You know, there's no judgments about additive versus subtractive here. They're both absolutely necessary, and at various times, each one has its merits and will be, sometimes one is a better approach, sometimes it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other, but many times one approach is clearly superior for a given moment in a production. And if you're not really ass deep in the subtractive mindset and you don't have a lot of tools on that side of the equation, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. And or what's going to happen, and is probably happening to a lot of you watching this show right now, is that you are using additive tools, additive techniques, and additive mindsets to address things in a way that results in a suboptimal, cartoonish representation of what you were going for. Brightness is a great example of this. That if you have a vocal, say, and that vocal was recorded with a dynamic mic up close, it is probably going to be immensely heavy between 200 and 600 hertz. And it is probably going to be quite light in presentation above 4 or 6K. Speaking in generalizations here. Right? So you've got that kind of vocal, and you want to make that vocal bright. You want to make any vocal bright. You can add high frequencies, you can distort it and compress it a little bit and add harmonic energy, which will add high frequencies and whatnot. Or you can grab an EQ, and I'm going to make a plug here for what is far and away my favorite EQ in the world right now, which is the new version of the Hammer. And maybe I'll throw this up on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. And maybe sometime I'll be motivated to do a demo, but that's probably too much work. And I'm just making this channel for you, so here's what you get. Take a vocal. If it's a female, probably 400 on the first band. If it's a male, 200, 300. Could be any or all of the above for anybody, but as a general rule, use this EQ, grab those frequencies on the first band, and turn it down, turn the gain down. And there's going to be a point, because this EQ is so broad, there's going to be a point somewhere between 2 and 4, probably closer to 3 or 4 dB, where you just like do this with the knob. 2 to -4, -2 to -4, maybe to -5, -1. Move it around and try to feel that point when the sound absolutely just like, it just hollows out completely. Like it's too empty down there. And it's probably going to be somewhere between 3 and 4 dB on the subtraction side, depending on how it was tracked. It might be 2, it might be anything, whatever. But just listen for that point and then find that fulcrum point. Park that gain knob there, maybe add a half a dB back so you don't suck all the warmth out of the vocal, but don't be afraid right now. And listen to what you got. You got a vocal that's just so much brighter. Now, this is not news to anybody who's been doing this for any length of time, but now you go for like the real hard brightness frequencies on a vocal. That's going to be 1.5, 2K, 2.5, maybe 3.5, but probably 2. 2 is a safe bet. 2 is just, it's like, no matter what your source, 2K, brighter, in your face. But now, because you've sucked all those low mids out, now you just have to crack it. You have all this energy is concentrated up in around 2K now. If you've taken out 400 hertz, around 2.5K, 3K is going to be really, really clear now. Just put a little bit of a point on that with the EQ now. And so now you're not really EQing the brightness. You're just shaping it. Just put a little bit of a nipple on that thing. And then maybe go to 8K, 10K, whatever. Open it up. But if you look at the EQ graph, I'm not always, love-hate relationship with these visual tools, but like on these EQs, on this EQ in particular, it can be really helpful with these broad curves to just look at that graph, look at the line that's resulting. And when you do this kind of a shape, look at how the high frequencies do kind of like this. They just do this perpetual rise to the ceiling from their low point down in the low mids. You can't get that shape by adding stuff in up high. You can't. If you use a shelf, you're going to lift it up and then it's going to level out, and the ear's going to be drawn to the corner of that shelf. But when you do these kind of subtractive moves, deep subtractive moves, pulling out the lows, man, then it's just a slow escalator up to the heavens, right? And that kind of brightness, when you hear it, if you do it right, it doesn't even sound like brightness. To me, it sounds like weightlessness. It's just amazing. Like you have this vocal that is so clear and present. There's not a trace of harshness. Maybe if you need to do some de-essing, you need like 2-3 dB on the worst stuff. Easy peasy. And then you get that vocal that's just like there. And then there's all this room around it and behind it and below it and above it and on the sides of it to put all the instruments, because there's space. You opened up all that space in the low mids. And it's very different than if you had tried to add the highs in, left those low mids mostly intact, or maybe done a tidy little cut down there with a narrow EQ. Subtractive mindset. It's not just for EQ. It's for gain. It's for compression and distortion. I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, get your head around this. Get your head around okay, back to our initial example, when you're like, I want to hear more bass, and your instinct was to turn the bass up. Would it have occurred to you to grab every other fader in the mix and turn it down? Probably not. And that probably would have, and maybe even in this moment, that kind of sounds weird. You're like, well, wait a minute. Do I really want to turn everything else down? And if you're hitting a bus compressor, it is a different result to turn the bass up into a mix compressor versus turning everything else down. I don't know which one's better. It depends on how you got things set up, right? But it's like, this wouldn't occur to you to be like, kind of. But if you're pushing into a compressor, it might be the case that just adding more gain, just pushing these faders up and up and up and up, everything keeps going up. When can I turn things down? Now, back to the bass example. I'm going to say, if you're listening to a mix and you're like, I want to hear or feel more bass, push it up by like a dB. And if that's not enough to do everything you wanted it to do, put that fader back where it was and start looking elsewhere at what you could take away to let the bass speak more. There aren't many instruments that step on the bottom of the bass, but bass clarity it's not generally about the bottom of the bass. It's generally about the middle and the top of the bass. And so your vocal, if your vocal's got too much 500 hertz, it's going to compete with the bass and vice versa. And if your snare has all that wonderful, beautiful 200 hertz that everybody loves these days, fights with the bass. Everything affects everything. What can you get out of the way to hear more of the thing or to feel more of the thing that you want to feel? That's my rant. That's what I got for now. Hopefully it's helpful. More to come. Kush After Hours. Gregory Scott. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.